She had come 2,000 miles to marry a stranger. The letter had promised her one man, one husband, one quiet life on a Montana mountain. But when three riders came down through the pines in the falling snow, and three enormous bearded men reined their horses in a half circle around her, Clara Mae Whitfield understood that the letter had lied. There were not one, there were three. And the whole valley of Silver Creek called them the Three Wolves of Hollow Pine because of a thing that had happened 7 years ago in Denver, a thing so terrible that no woman in Montana would marry into that family. Not one Bama. Now let me tell you the story of the mail-order bride who married into that house anyway, and how a woman with nothing but a valise and her mother's gold cameo brought three broken men back to life. She stepped down from the stagecoach into the teeth of a Montana winter, her worn leather valise clutched in one trembling hand, her mother's gold cameo pinned at her throat like a talisman against the cold. The year was 1887, the month was November, and the letter in her coat pocket had promised her a home, a husband, a future carved out of the western frontier. The letter had been honest in its way, but it had not told her everything. Clara Mae Whitfield stood at the bottom of the mountain road with snow gathering on the shoulders of her navy blue traveling dress, and she understood for the first time in her 23 years what it meant to be truly alone in the world. If you love stories of the American frontier, stories of rugged men and resilient women, and the hard country that made them both stay with me tonight, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you are listening from. Pour yourself a cup of coffee. Settle into your chair, because this story is going to take us deep into the Montana mountains, into a cabin where three brothers lived with their grief, and into the heart of a woman who had nothing left to lose. Her story began 7 months earlier in Charleston, South Carolina. Clara Mae had buried her father on a warm spring morning in April, the magnolias blooming white and heavy around the old cemetery behind St. Philip's Church. Ezekiel Whitfield had been a good man, a Confederate veteran who never spoke of the war, a widower who raised his only daughter on tea and Shakespeare and the quiet dignity of a family that had once owned property along the Ashley River. The tuberculosis had taken him slowly, coughing him into a ghost of himself across 2 long winters, and when Clara Mae laid him to rest beside her mother and her brother Theodore, she believed she had already suffered the worst that life could give her. She had been wrong. The creditors came within a week of the funeral. The house on Meeting Street, the last property the Whitfields had managed to hold on to through reconstruction, was sold to a Boston businessman who did not even bother to attend the auction. Clara Mae watched strangers carry her mother's piano out through the front door, and she did not weep because there was no one left to weep in front of. She understood then that she was the last Whitfield on earth. Her brother Theodore had fallen at Gettysburg in '63, a boy of 19 who had marched north with a Confederate flag and never marched home. Her mother had died of grief and a weak heart when Clara Mae was just 8 years old. And now her father lay in the churchyard and the house was gone, and the $150 she had from the sale would not last her the summer. She had tried to return to her work at Magnolia Hall, the small academy for young ladies, where she had taught literature and mathematics for 3 years. But the headmistress, a narrow-faced woman named Prudence Lockhart, had dismissed her the previous autumn for what she called a breach of moral instruction. Clara Mae had given her students a copy of Adam Bede by George Eliot. She had wanted them to understand that women wrote literature of depth and consequence. Prudence Lockhart had called it corruption. Clara Mae had told the woman with more heat than wisdom that the only corruption in Charleston was the pretense that young women could not think for themselves. She had been dismissed that same afternoon. No other school would hire her. Charleston had a long memory for a woman who spoke out of turn. The advertisement found her on a rainy Tuesday in May. She was sitting at a small table in the boarding house, where she had taken a cheap room eating day-old bread and reading a newspaper someone had left on the common table. The paper was 3 weeks old. The matrimonial news printed in Chicago for the benefit of lonely men in the territories. Clara Mae had picked it up only because she was tired of her own thoughts. The notice was small, set in plain black type, and it read as follows: seeking a respectable woman of strong character, sound health, and willingness to marry and establish family on a mountain ranch in Montana territory. No deception, honest contract, generous provision. Correspondence to S. Hollow Hollow Pine Ridge, Silver Creek, Montana. Clara May read it twice. Then she read it a third time. The man who had written this notice was not promising love. He was not promising romance. He was offering the contract plainly stated for a wife who would bear his family and help him build a life in the wilderness. Clara May thought of her mother's cameo and her father's copies of Shakespeare and the $50 she had left in the world, and she took up her pen and wrote a reply. She did not flatter. She did not lie. She did not promise a love she could not feel for a man she had never met. She wrote instead of her education, of her capacity for hard work, of the fact that she had lost everything and was not afraid of starting over. She sent the letter that same evening. 3 weeks passed. She began to forget she had written it. And then on a Thursday morning in early June, a thick envelope arrived at the boarding house with a Montana postmark and her name written in strong, slanting handwriting. Inside, she found $100 in gold coin, a train ticket routed through Atlanta and St. Louis and Omaha, and a single sheet of paper on which was written only this: Miss Whitfield, Hollow Pine Ridge, will expect your arrival by the 15th of November. Come before the heavy snow falls. Respectfully, S. Hollow. Clara May sat on the narrow bed of her rented room and held the letter in her hand, and for the first time since her father's death, she allowed herself to weep. Not from sorrow, from something more complicated. Relief, fear, the terrible freedom of a door opening when she had thought all the doors were closed forever. She wrote back that same day accepting. She did not tell the stranger in Montana that his money was the difference between survival and the streets. She did not tell him that she did not know how to be anyone's wife. She only told him that she would come and that she would keep her word. The journey took 14 days. Charleston to Atlanta, Atlanta to Memphis, Memphis to St. Louis, where she changed to the Union Pacific line and rode westward into a country that grew wilder and emptier with every hour. She watched the South give way to the plains give way to the high, dry country of Nebraska and Wyoming, and finally on the 12th day the mountains rose before her like a wall of dark teeth set against a white sky. On the night train from Cheyenne north to Billings, an old woman sat down beside her. She was small and gray and wore a faded black bonnet, and her name, she said, was Hester Brockway. She was traveling to her daughter's homestead near Great Falls. She asked Clara May where she was going. Clara May told her, Silver Creek, Hollow Pine Ridge. The old woman was silent for a long time. She looked out the window at the dark pines rolling past, and when she spoke again, her voice was careful. Child, she said, do you know anything about the Hollow family? Only what the advertisement said, Clara May answered. 3 brothers live up there on that mountain. Hester Brockway said. They have been up there 7 years. They do not come down to Silver Creek much. When they do come down, they come for supplies and they do not linger. The whole valley calls them the 3 wolves of Hollow Pine. There was a terrible thing that happened to them once, back in Denver before they came north. A thing that broke something in them that has not healed. I cannot tell you what it was. I only know that no woman in Silver Creek would marry into that family. Not one. Clara May looked down at her gloved hands. And now you are going up there, Hester Brockway said softly. Alone. I have nowhere else to go, Clara May said. The old woman reached over and patted her wrist. Then God keep you, child, and may those brothers remember their mother raised them kindly before the sorrow took them. Clara May did not sleep that night. She watched the mountains grow larger through the window, and she thought of her own mother and of the words her mother had spoken to her the year before she died. Clara May, her mother had said, her voice already thin with the illness that would take her life, will lead you to places you never dreamed of going. Do not be afraid. Every door that closes is another door opening. You will see. You will see. Clara May had forgotten those words for 15 years. She remembered them now. She arrived in Silver Creek on the afternoon of November 13th. The town was small, a dozen buildings strung along a single muddy street, a saloon, a general store, a blacksmith, a Methodist church with a crooked steeple. Snow was already falling steadily, and the sky to the north was the color of wet iron. The stagecoach that would take her up to the base of Hollow Pine Ridge was waiting in front of the livery, its driver an old man wrapped in a buffalo coat. His name was Obadiah Jenks, and he was perhaps 70 years old with a white beard stained yellow by tobacco and eyes the color of winter sky. "You the Whitfield girl?" he asked her. "Yes." "Climb in. Weather's coming. I can take you to the base of the ridge. I cannot take you up the mountain. Road's too narrow for a coach. Someone will come down to meet you." "Who will come?" Obadiah Jenks shrugged. "Whichever of them draws the short straw, I imagine." He clucked to his horses, and they set out through the deepening snow, the stagecoach swaying and groaning as the road climbed out of the valley and into the pines. Clara May watched the country grow wilder through the small window. No houses, no fences, only the black trees and the gray ski in the snow falling and falling. It was nearly dusk when the coach stopped at a fork in the road where a narrow trail cut away up the mountainside. Obadiah Jenks climbed down stiffly and helped Clara May to the ground. He set her valise beside her on the packed snow. "They know you are coming today," he said. "One will be along. Do not wander off the road. A body can get lost up here and never be found." He climbed back into the coach. He looked down at her through the snow. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "I have known the Hollow brothers 19 years. Their mother was a fine woman. Their father was a hard man but a fair one. Whatever the three wolves of Hollow Pine may have become, they came from good people. Remember that." Then he turned the coach and was gone, and Clara May stood alone at the base of the mountain in the falling snow. She stood there for nearly an hour. The cold worked its way through her wool shawl and through the thin soles of her traveling shoes. Her fingers went numb inside her gloves. She began to wonder if perhaps she had been forgotten, or if something had happened, or if the man who had signed his name S. Hollow had simply changed his mind about a mail-order bride and was going to leave her to freeze at the bottom of his mountain. The thought was so terrible that she almost laughed aloud. She had come 2,000 miles to die in the snow of Montana, and it would serve her right for being the kind of woman who answered advertisements in Lonely Hearts papers. And then she heard the hoofbeats. 3 riders came down through the pines, moving single file, their horses dark shapes against the white of the fallen snow. Clara May stood straighter and pressed her frozen hands against the sides of her dress to stop them from shaking. She had not known there would be 3. She had been told, of course, that the ranch belonged to brothers. But in her mind, there had been only one. S. Hollow, the man who had written the letter, the man who would be her husband. The 3 riders reined their horses in a half-circle around her, and for a moment none of them spoke. They were enormous men, even bundled in heavy coats and fur hats. They were plainly enormous, the kind of men who seemed to have been carved out of the mountain itself. When they removed their hats, 3 hatted heads became 3 bearded faces, and Clara May understood that she was looking at brothers. They had the same strong jaw, the same straight nose, the same whiskey-colored eyes that seemed to hold their own internal light. Chestnut brown hair tangled from the ride, weathered skin tanned brown even in winter. They were not identical. She could see differences once she looked carefully. The man in the center was the oldest and the largest, his face the hardest. The man on the left was slimmer through the shoulders, his expression quieter, more watchful. The man on the right was the youngest, with something softer around the mouth, something closer to a smile. But they looked enough alike to have been cut from the same block of wood, and Clara May, who had never seen such men in her life, did not know what to say. The man in the center swung down from his horse. He stood a foot taller than she did. He looked down at her with no expression at all. "Miss Whitfield," he said. His voice was deep and quiet and entirely without warmth. "I am Samuel Hollow. These are my brothers." He gestured to the man on the left. "Jeremiah." He gestured to the man on the right. "Caleb." Clara May opened her mouth and found she had no voice. She swallowed. She tried again. "Mr. Hollow," she said, Your letter spoke of only one man." Samuel Hollow's jaw worked briefly. My letter spoke of the ranch, he said. Hollow Pine Ridge belongs to all three of us. I am the eldest. I will be your lawful husband, but we share one house. You will live with all of us. I thought that was clear in the correspondence. It had not been clear. Clara May could feel her face going white, even in the cold. She thought for one terrible moment that she might faint in the snow at his feet. The youngest brother Caleb swung down from his own horse. He moved with a different kind of grace than his older brother, quicker, less controlled. He came to her carefully, the way a man might approach a frightened animal. Miss Whitfield, he said, and his voice was kinder than Samuel's. You are half frozen. Let us take you up to the house. Warm yourself. Have something hot to drink. We can talk about all of this inside where it is warm. And if by tomorrow morning you wish to return to Silver Creek, I will ride down with you myself. My brother will pay your passage back to Charleston or anywhere else you wish to go. No one will force you into anything. I give you my word. Something in the way he said, give you my word, made Clara May believe him. She did not know why. She only knew that this youngest brother, this Caleb Hollow with the softer mouth and the quicker movements, was telling her the truth. She nodded. She could not speak. Caleb lifted her valise as though it weighed nothing. He held out a gloved hand to help her up behind Samuel on the larger horse. Samuel sat still in the saddle, his back as straight as a fence post, and did not look at her. Hold on, Miss Whitfield, he said over his shoulder. The road is rough. She put her arms around his waist because there was nothing else to hold. She felt the heat of him even through the heavy coat. She felt him flinch just slightly at the touch. And she understood in that small, involuntary motion that Samuel Hollow was not a man who let himself be touched. That whatever had happened to him in Denver 7 years ago, he was still carrying it. They rode up the mountain through the falling snow, the three horses moving steadily along the narrow cut of the road, the pines closing in above them, until the whole world became a tunnel of white and green and gray. Clara May held on to her husband-to-be, and she watched the country she was riding into, and she understood that she had crossed some invisible line. She could not go back to Charleston, not truly, not even if she rode down this mountain tomorrow morning with Caleb Hollow at her side. Whatever she had been before, she was not that woman anymore. She was a woman who had accepted a stranger's money to become his wife. She was a woman on a mountain with 3 enormous brothers and no one to help her if she was wrong about them. She had never in her life been so afraid. Then, and also strangely, never so alive. The house, when they finally came to it, was not what she had expected. She had pictured a cabin, a rough log shelter, a single room with a dirt floor and a smoking stove. What she saw as they came out of the pines into a wide clearing on the shoulder of the mountain was a large 2-story house built of squared timber and stone with 3 brick chimneys, all trailing smoke into the fading light. Around the main house stood a barn, a long stable, a smaller structure that looked like a workshop, and improbably in this wild country, a small greenhouse with glass panes catching the last blue of the evening. The clearing had been cut with care. The outbuildings were in good repair. A split-rail fence enclosed a snowy pasture where a dozen horses stood, blowing steam from their nostrils. A dog, some kind of mountain shepherd, came running out to meet them, barking once and then falling silent as Samuel spoke its name. Rex. This was not the cabin of 3 hermits. This was a working ranch. Someone had built this place with patience and skill and an eye for the long years. Samuel swung down from the horse and helped Clara May to the ground. His hands were strong and impersonal. He did not meet her eyes. He turned and walked toward the front door of the house, and Clara May followed with Caleb at her elbow, steady and watchful. The door opened before they reached it, and a short, round woman in a blue apron came out onto the porch with a shawl thrown over her shoulders. She was perhaps 60, with iron gray hair and a kind face marked by years of weather. She looked at Clara May, and her face crumpled into a smile. "Oh, you poor lamb," she said. "You are chilled through. Come in, come in. I have a fire going and soup on the stove. My name is Ida Pearson, and I am going to take very good care of you. Do you hear me? Come inside before you freeze to death on the porch." She took Clara May's arm and swept her into the house, and Clara May found herself stepping across a threshold into warmth and light and the smell of wood smoke and leather and coffee. The interior of the house was plain but clean. Wide plank floors, walls of tongue and groove pine, a large stone fireplace against the north wall with a fire cracking inside it, a long table in the middle of the room set for four, oil lamps burning on the walls, books, everywhere books, shelves of them lining the walls of what she could see of the next room. Dozens, perhaps hundreds. And above the fireplace, a framed photograph in a silver frame. A young woman in a dark dress, her hair pulled back, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes looking out of the photograph with a calm, steady kindness that made Clara May's breath catch in her throat. That was their mother, Ida Pearson said quietly beside her. Miriam Hollow, she passed in '69. She was a fine woman, taught all four of her children to read before they were 6 years old. It was her taught them to love books. All four, Clara May said. Ida Pearson's face went still. Yes, dear, there was a sister. That is not a story I will tell. That is theirs to tell when and if they choose. Samuel came in through the door behind them, stamping snow from his boots. He had taken off his hat, and she could see for the first time the full shape of his head. Dark chestnut hair going silver at the temples. A scar along his left cheekbone that pulled slightly when he turned. He was perhaps 34 years old. He looked older. Mrs. Pearson will show you to your room, he said. There is hot water for washing. When you are ready, come down to the parlor. I want to go over the contract with you tonight. You will want to know what you are agreeing to before you sleep under this roof. He turned and walked into the next room without waiting for her answer. Caleb set her valise at the foot of the stairs. He gave her a small smile that did not quite reach his eyes. My brother, he said quietly, is not cold. He is only careful. Give him time. Then he too was gone, following his brother into the parlor, and Clara May stood in the entrance hall of the house where she was going to be a wife and held her mother's cameo between her cold fingers and tried to remember how to breathe. An hour later, she came down the stairs. She had washed her face in the basin of hot water Ida Pearson had carried up to her room. She had changed into her other dress, a plain brown wool that had been her mother's. She had pinned her hair back neatly. She looked, she thought, like a woman who had chosen this. Not a woman who had been driven here by debt and grief. Samuel was waiting for her in the parlor, standing beside a small writing desk with a sheaf of papers in his hand. Jeremiah stood by the fireplace reading a book. Caleb was not present. Clara May later understood that Caleb had absented himself on purpose. He wanted her to face Samuel alone. He wanted her to make her own decision without the youngest brother's kindness to push her toward a yes. Samuel gestured to a chair. Please sit, Miss Whitfield. She sat. He sat across from her. He laid the papers on the small table between them. This is the contract, he said. I will read the terms to you aloud. Stop me at any point and ask any question you wish. Proceed, Clara May said. Her voice was steadier than she had expected. He read. The terms were these. Clara May Whitfield would marry Samuel Hollow according to the laws of Montana Territory. She would reside at Hollow Pine Ridge. She would be provided with her own private room, adequate food, medical care, and clothing. She would bear, God willing, an heir to the Hollow family, a child who would inherit the ranch equally from all three brothers. She would be treated with respect by every man under this roof. If at the end of 1 full year she wished to leave, she would be given $500 in gold and safe passage to any city east of the Mississippi. She would not be forced. She would not be touched without her consent. She would not be made to do anything she did not wish to do, save the single obligation of bearing a child, and even that obligation was to be fulfilled only when she herself was ready. Samuel finished reading. He set the papers down. Questions, he said. Clara May drew in her breath. Mr. Hollow, she said, why mail order? You are not an old man. You are clearly not a poor one. Silver Creek must have daughters. Why did you advertise for a woman in a newspaper printed in Chicago? Samuel's jaw worked. Jeremiah closed his book quietly. Because Samuel said after a long moment, no daughter of Silver Creek would come up this mountain to marry into this family, not one. Why? Clara May asked. Samuel did not answer at first. He stared into the fire. Jeremiah stepped forward. I will tell her, Jeremiah said. Samuel did not look at him. Not tonight. Then she will hear it tomorrow, Jeremiah said softly. She has the right to know what she is walking into. She has earned that, Sam. She came 2,000 miles. Samuel said nothing. Jeremiah turned to Clara May. His voice was gentle. She saw a man of very few words, and when he chose to use them, he chose them with care. 7 years ago, Jeremiah said, my brother was engaged to a woman in Denver, a woman named Vivian Ashmore. She was beautiful and she was well-connected, and we were wrong about her. 2 weeks before the wedding, she took half of my brother's money through papers he had signed in good faith, and she ran off with another man. The other half of that story, the part that broke something in him, I will tell you tomorrow. Not tonight. Tonight is enough. But I will tell you this, Miss Whitfield. My brother is not cold. He is wounded. He built this ranch out of that wound. He has not let a woman come near him in 7 years. He chose to advertise in Chicago because it was the only way he could think of to find someone who did not already know the story. He wanted a stranger. He wanted someone who would come to this mountain without pity in her eyes. Clara May looked at Samuel. Samuel Hollow did not look back at her. He looked at the fire. His hands were folded tightly in his lap. She could see the tendons standing out in the backs of them. I am not that woman, she said quietly. He looked up then. I am not the woman who took your money and ran, Clara May said. I am not beautiful. I am not well connected. I have no plans for you, Mr. Hollow. I have no one left in the world. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. That is the truth, and you may take it or leave it. But I will not pity you. I do not have the strength to pity anyone but myself just now. So if you want a wife who will not look at you with soft eyes and wounded sympathy, I believe I am that woman. The room was very quiet. Samuel Hollow looked at her for a long moment. She could not read his face. Then very slightly he nodded. 3 days, he said. Take 3 days. Watch the house. Watch my brothers. Watch me. If at the end of 3 days you wish to stay, we will send for the minister and we will sign the contract. If you wish to leave, Caleb will take you down the mountain, and I will pay your passage home wherever home is. Home is here now, Clara May said. Or it is nowhere. I have already decided, Mr. Hollow. I will stay. Samuel studied her. Then take the 3 days anyway, he said. A woman should not bind herself to a house she has not yet lived in. He stood. He picked up the papers. He walked to the doorway, and there he stopped. He did not turn back to face her when he spoke. Miss Whitfield, he said quietly, welcome to Hollow Pine Ridge. Then he was gone. Jeremiah remained. He closed his book. He looked at her with the kind, steady eyes of a man who had been watching her very carefully. You did well, he said. He did not expect you. He did not expect any of this. Give him time, Miss Whitfield. There is a good man underneath. We all 3 of us used to be good men. Maybe if you are patient, we can remember how to be again. He bowed slightly, a small, old-fashioned gesture, and he too left the room. Clara May sat alone in the parlor by the fire for a long time. She looked at the photograph of Miriam Hollow above the mantel. She thought of her own mother. She thought of the old woman on the train saying, God keep you, child. She thought of what her life had been 1 year ago and what it had become now, and she understood that she had in the space of a single evening become someone entirely new. Clara May Whitfield of Charleston was still sitting inside her somewhere, but a different woman had begun to grow around that girl tonight. A woman who would have to be stronger. A woman who would have to learn things Clara May Whitfield had never needed to learn. The 3 days passed. On the first day, Clara May stayed mostly inside. She helped Ida Pearson in the kitchen. She learned that the Hollow brothers ate breakfast at 5 in the morning, dinner at noon, and supper at 6 in the evening. She learned that Samuel worked longer hours than any man she had ever seen, that he rose at 4 and did not come in from the barns until full dark. She learned that Jeremiah cared for the 14 horses and that he knew each horse by name, and that in the evenings after supper, he would sit by the fire and play softly on a harmonica the same beautiful tunes over and over, tunes that made Ida Pearson hum along as she washed the dishes. She learned that Caleb was the hunter, that he disappeared before dawn with his rifle and came back at dusk with elk meat or trout or prairie grouse slung over his shoulder, and that he brought her something small every day. The first day it was a fir branch, its needles still green beneath the snow. The second day it was a single wildflower pressed flat and dried that he had found under a rock and thought she might like to see. The third day it was a piece of river quartz shaped almost like a heart, and when he gave it to her, he did not say anything. He only set it on the kitchen table in front of her and gave her one slow nod and walked away. On the second day, Clara May began to understand the rhythm of the house. She saw how the three brothers moved around each other, how they had worked out across 7 years of living alone together a kind of silent choreography of daily life. Samuel decided, Jeremiah observed, Caleb acted. They did not argue. They did not waste words. They had become so accustomed to each other's presence that they sometimes seemed to share a single mind. And she saw the careful spaces they were leaving for her. They were trying, she realized, all three of them. They did not know how to have a woman in the house. They had not had a woman under this roof, aside from Ida Pearson, who came and went for 7 long years. They were clumsy with her. They were formal. Samuel set a cup of hot coffee in front of her every morning without a word. Jeremiah brought her a book the second evening, an old copy of Oliver Twist, and said, only my mother loved this one. You may keep it. Caleb made her laugh for the first time on the second day when he slipped on an icy patch in the yard and landed in a snowdrift and sat up sputtering and swearing and saw her laughing at him through the kitchen window. He grinned up at her, snow on his beard, and the grin was the first thing that made her feel truly that she had come to a place where she might someday be happy. On the third day, Clara May walked out into the greenhouse. It was the greenhouse that decided her. She had not understood at first what a greenhouse was doing on a remote mountain ranch in Montana. When she pushed open the door and stepped inside, she understood. The glass walls had trapped the pale winter sun, and the air within was warm and moist. Plants were growing, herbs, vegetables, a small rose bush in a clay pot, its leaves still green, and on a wooden bench along one wall neatly arranged were 3 pairs of gardening gloves. A large pair, a slightly smaller pair, a smaller pair still, all of them worn and stained. 3 brothers who had lost their mother, 3 brothers who had lost their sister, 3 brothers who had built a greenhouse on top of a mountain so that they could keep something green and living through the long white winter. Clara May stood in the warmth of that greenhouse and she began to cry not for her own grief, for theirs, for the tenderness in men who had every reason to be hard. When she came back into the house, Samuel was standing in the kitchen. He had come in early. He looked at her face, at the redness around her eyes, and his own face went very still. I am not crying for myself, she said before he could speak. I am crying for your greenhouse. He did not answer, but something shifted behind his eyes, some slight loosening of the long-held tightness, and she thought perhaps this was the first moment that Samuel Hollow had understood that the woman who had come up his mountain was not his enemy. Send for the minister, she said quietly. I will stay. Samuel nodded once. He did not smile, but he nodded, and that nod was enough. The minister from Silver Creek, a long-legged old man named Elijah Barnes, rode up through the snow on the morning of November 17th, 1887. The ceremony was brief. It took place in the parlor in front of the fireplace beneath a photograph of Miriam Hollow. Clara May wore the blue wool dress her mother had given her on her 15th birthday. Samuel wore a clean white shirt and his father's dark wool coat. Ida Pearson wept quietly. Jeremiah and Caleb stood as witnesses, their big hands folded in front of them, their faces solemn and unreadable. Samuel slipped a gold ring onto Clara May's finger. It was his mother's wedding ring. She could see the wear of 19 years of marriage in the thin places along its inside edge. When she turned it in the lamplight, she could just read the faded inscription, "All my days, E. H. Ezra Hollow, his father." The man who had loved Miriam until she died and then died himself, the brother said of a broken heart. "Do you wish a new ring?" Samuel asked quietly. "I can order one from Chicago." Clara May closed her fingers around the old gold band. "No," she said, "I will keep this one." Reverend Barnes pronounced them husband and wife. Samuel did not kiss her. He only inclined his head toward her slightly and said in a voice only she could hear, "You owe me nothing tonight. This is a contract, not a love match. We will build whatever we build slowly." She was more relieved than she could say, and also somewhere she did not wish to examine, faintly disappointed. That night, Caleb left a small clay pot of hot chamomile tea on the table beside her bed. A note rested beside it in careful handwriting. "You are safe in this house. No one will trouble you tonight. Not tonight and not any night until you are ready. We are decent men, though we may not look it, Caleb." Clara May read the note 3 times, then she lay down in her new bed in her new room under her new roof, and she wept not from sorrow but from the unfamiliar weight of kindness given freely by a man who owed her nothing at all. Outside, the snow was falling thickly over Hollow Pine Ridge. Inside, a stranger had taken her husband's name, but she had not yet taken his bed. That would come later when the time was right. For tonight it was enough that she was under his roof and that she was no longer alone in the world. And somewhere in the back of the great silent house, in a room she had never yet entered, her new husband sat alone by his own cold hearth and stared at the dark, and he understood for the first time in 7 years that the door he had closed against the world had, just without his permission, been opened. The first week of marriage passed in a strange, fragile silence. Clara May learned the shape of her new life by small degrees, the way a person learns a foreign language, one word at a time. She learned that the kitchen stove needed to be banked with ash at night or the fire would die by morning. She learned that the well pump froze solid if no one broke the ice in it before dawn. She learned that Samuel ate his breakfast standing up, leaning against the counter with his coffee cup in one hand and his mind already out in the barn among the cattle. She learned that Jeremiah took his coffee black and read the newspaper 2 weeks old by the window while he drank it. She learned that Caleb, who should have been the youngest and the most restless, was in fact the one who lingered longest over meals, who asked her quiet questions about Charleston and about her father and about the books she had loved as a girl. She learned too that no one in this house spoke about Lily. The name was never said aloud, but it lived in every corner of the place. It lived in the empty fourth chair at the supper table, which no one moved. It lived in the small, carved wooden horse on the mantelpiece, sitting alone beside the silver, framed photograph of Miriam Hollow. It lived in the way Caleb would sometimes stop mid-sentence and look at nothing for a silent moment before shaking himself back into the present. It lived in the third pair of gardening gloves in the greenhouse, smaller than the others, untouched for 7 years. Clara May did not ask. She only waited. Her mother had taught her long ago that some stories come when they are ready and not before. On the morning of her 7th day, as Samuel's wife Ida Pearson took her aside in the kitchen, the old housekeeper was kneading bread dough with her strong, freckled arms, and she spoke without looking up. "Mrs. Hollow," she said. Clara May still jumped a little every time she heard the name. "I have tracked your cycles from the little almanac you keep in the parlor drawer. Forgive an old woman her nosiness. This week is your best week. If you and Mr. Samuel are to try for a child, this is the time." Clara May's face grew warm. She was 23 years old. She had never been kissed. She had never been alone in a room with a man who was not her father or her brother. "Thank you, Mrs. Pearson," she said quietly. "He is a good man, child," the housekeeper added without looking up. "He does not know it anymore. He used to. He may again. But he will never know it if someone does not have the courage to remind him." That evening after supper, Clara May found Samuel in his small office off the parlor. He was writing figures in a ledger by the light of a single oil lamp. She stood in the doorway until he felt her there and looked up. "Samuel," she said. It was the first time she had used his given name aloud. I believe the time is right, if you wish. He set the pen down very carefully. He did not speak for a long moment. Then he said, "Are you certain?" "I gave my word when I signed the contract," she answered. "I do not give my word lightly. That is not the same as being certain." She swallowed. "I am as certain as I am able to be." He stood. He was very tall in the small room. He came around the desk and stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the pulse in his throat above the collar of his shirt. His eyes in the lamplight were not the cold whiskey color she remembered from the road. They were softer. They were almost afraid. "I will come to your room in an hour," he said. "I will knock. If you have changed your mind, do not answer and I will go away. No questions, no reproach. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Clara," he said. It was the first time he had said her given name. "Thank you." She went upstairs. She changed into her white nightdress. She sat by the small fire in her room and brushed her hair out slowly, her hands trembling, despite everything she could do to steady them. After a long time, she heard his boots on the stairs. She heard him stop outside her door. He knocked once, softly. She rose and she opened the door and Samuel Hollow stepped inside. The door closed behind him. The wind rose outside the window. Snow began to fall thickly over Hollow Pine Ridge. And when dawn came at last, Clara Mae Whitfield Hollow was no longer the girl who had stepped off the stagecoach at Silver Creek. She had become someone else. Someone quieter. Someone who understood in a way she had not understood the night before that the hardest men in the world can sometimes be the most gentle when the lamp is low and no one is watching. Samuel was gone before she woke. She came down to breakfast to find him already at the table with a cup of coffee in his hand, his face arranged in its usual careful blankness. He did not look at her. Jeremiah and Caleb were both present. No one spoke of anything but the weather and the day's work. Clara Mae understood in that moment that this was how it was going to be. Samuel would come to her when it was needed. He would leave before dawn. He would say nothing. Not because he did not feel, but because he did. And feeling was the one thing in this world he could not allow himself. It hurt her more than she had expected. She had not thought she wanted tenderness. She discovered now wrong about that. The weeks that followed fell into a hard rhythm. December came and with it the first heavy snows. Samuel rode out every day into brutal cold to tend the cattle. Jeremiah broke ice on the horse troughs and forked hay in the barn. Caleb disappeared for days at a time on long hunting trips, coming back with elk carcasses lashed behind his saddle. Clara Mae found her own place in the work. She took over the household ledgers within her first 2 weeks, and by the end of her third week, she had found an error in Samuel's accounts from the previous October that amounted to $47. When she showed him the mistake, he studied the page for a long time. Then he looked up at her with something like respect in his eyes. "You are good with numbers," he said. "I taught mathematics at a girls' school in Charleston," she answered. "I was dismissed for it. A woman who understood algebra was considered dangerous." For the first time since she had met him, Samuel Hollow smiled. It was only a small movement at one corner of his mouth, and it was gone almost before it appeared. But she saw it, and she marked it in her heart. She began to write letters to her old friends at Magnolia Hall, asking them to send any books they no longer needed. To the small postmaster station at Silver Creek, making arrangements for the packages when they arrived. She had an idea. She did not yet share it with anyone. And every night Jeremiah Hollow played his harmonica by the parlor fire. The same handful of slow, sad tunes played over and over. Clara Mae had not asked him what they were. She had assumed they were old folk songs. Then one evening in mid-December, she asked Ida Pearson about them, and the old housekeeper looked up from her knitting with a strange, sorrowful expression. "Those were Lily's favorites," Ida said quietly. "He plays them for her every night. He has played them every night for 7 years." Clara Mae sat very still. She watched Jeremiah across the room. His eyes were closed. His big, calloused hands cupped the small harmonica gently against his mouth. The tune rose and fell and rose again, pure and mournful, and full of some private grief she could not yet name. That same week the blizzard came. It came in the afternoon of the 18th of December, a wall of white that rolled down out of the high country and buried the ranch in 48 hours of howling wind. Samuel was away. He had ridden to Bozeman that morning on business concerning a land dispute. Caleb had gone up into the high country 2 days before to lay in meat for the winter. Only Jeremiah and Clara May and Ida Pearson were at the ranch when the storm hit. On the second night of the storm, the parlor chimney choked with ice. Smoke began to pour into the room. Ida Pearson gave a cry. Jeremiah was already moving. He grabbed an iron bar from the hearth and headed for the stairs to the roof. Clara May caught up her shawl and followed him. "Mrs. Hollow, no," Jeremiah said over his shoulder. "It is dangerous." "I am coming," she answered. "You cannot do this alone." He did not argue. They climbed together through the attic hatch onto the steep, snow-covered roof, the wind tearing at their clothes, the cold like knives against their faces. Jeremiah braced himself against the chimney and began striking at the ice plug with the iron bar. Clara May held the lantern steady with frozen fingers, shielding its flame from the wind with her body. The minutes passed like hours. Her hands went numb. Her face went numb. At last, the ice gave way with a great soft whoomp, and smoke blasted up out of the open chimney and was whipped away into the storm. They made it back down through the hatch. Jeremiah half carried her the last 3 rungs of the ladder because her legs had stopped working. Ida Pearson wrapped them both in blankets and pushed mugs of hot coffee into their shaking hands. Later, when Ida had gone to bed, Jeremiah and Clara May sat by the reopened fire. The wind screamed outside. The house creaked against it. They did not speak for a long time. Then Jeremiah said very quietly, "I have never told anyone about her. Not properly." Clara May did not answer. She did not want to interrupt whatever was about to come. "Her name was Lily," Jeremiah said. "She was born in the winter of '68. Our mother died when Lily was 1 year old. Our father died the following spring. Sam was 16, I was 14, Caleb was 12. Lily was 2 years old and she had no one but 3 half-grown boys to raise her." He stared into the fire. "We raised her," he said, "the 3 of us, in a mining camp outside Helena, and then on a little sheep farm we worked with our uncle until he died, and then on our own in a line shack up near the Missouri. We did not know how to raise a child. We made 1,000 mistakes. But she grew up laughing. She grew up loved. She was the light of everything we did." His voice caught slightly. He took a breath. In 1880, Sam got engaged to a woman named Vivian Ashmore in Denver. We had come into a little money by then. A silver claim had paid out. Sam wanted to build a proper life. He fell in love with Vivian, or thought he did. He brought Lily down from the ranch to meet her future sister. Lily was 12 years old, bright, curious, trusting. He closed his eyes. Vivian did not like her. She thought Sam loved his sister more than he loved his bride. It is hard to explain the kind of woman Vivian was, Clara. She was beautiful and she was practiced, and she was very, very cruel. One evening, she offered to take Lily to what she called a little party at a friend's house. She told Lily that Sam would be there. She told Sam that Lily was spending the evening with a respectable family on the other side of town. In truth, she left our sister alone in a room at a place no young girl should ever have entered. It was not a respectable house, Clara. It was a house of the worst sort. Clara May put her hand to her mouth. "We found her before anything happened to her body," Jeremiah said. Thank God. Thank God. But she had seen things. She had heard things. She was never the same again. She did not speak for weeks. She grew thin. She would not eat. Sam hired every doctor in Denver. Nothing helped. And 3 months later, we found her in the shallows of the South Platte River. The coroner ruled it an accident. We knew it was not. The fire cracked. The wind howled. Clara May's tears slid silently down her face. Sam broke off the engagement and Jeremiah said. He discovered then that Vivian had already put half his assets in her own name through papers he had signed before the wedding. She and another man, Barnaby Ridgway, disappeared together, took everything they could take. Sam did not pursue them. He did not care about the money. He only cared that Lily was dead and that he had brought her into a house where a woman like Vivian could reach her. He has carried that guilt for 7 years. All three of us have. But Sam has carried it worst of all. He looked at her at last. That is why no woman in Silver Creek would marry into this family, he said. The story is known up and down the valley. That is why he advertised in a paper printed in a city 2,000 miles away. He wanted a woman who did not know. He wanted, I think, to give himself one last chance to build something. And instead of the woman he advertised for, he got you. What sort of woman did he think he was advertising for? Clara May said softly. Jeremiah's mouth moved in a small, sad smile. A practical one. A quiet one. A woman who would give him a child and leave him otherwise alone inside his grief. He did not advertise for a woman who would climb onto the roof in a blizzard. He did not advertise for a woman who would find the error in his ledger. He did not advertise for a woman who would make my brother Caleb laugh again for the first time in 7 years. I believe my brother does not yet know what to do with you, Clara May. I believe he is more afraid of you than he has ever been of anything else in his life. Clara May looked into the fire. She thought about the man who had slipped a gold ring onto her finger without quite looking at her. She thought about the way he had said her name once in the half-dark of her room. I am not going to hurt him, Jeremiah, she said. I know you are not, Jeremiah answered, but he does not know that yet. And so the burden is on him, not on you. Be patient. He will find his way. He rose, he set a gentle hand briefly on her shoulder and then lifted it away. Thank you for coming up on the roof with me tonight, he said. You are a Hollow now, Mrs. Hollow, in more ways than you perhaps realize. He left her alone by the fire. Clara May sat up long into the night. She understood many things now that she had not understood before. She understood why Samuel would not look at her in the morning. She understood why the fourth chair at the table stood empty and unmoved. She understood why the third pair of gardening gloves hung untouched in the greenhouse. And she understood, too, that she was not simply a wife in this house. She was the first new thing in 7 years that had been allowed through its door. The storm broke on the third day. Samuel rode home through waist-deep snow on an exhausted horse. He came into the kitchen white with palled and stood looking at Clara May for a long moment before he spoke. Mrs. Pearson told me what you did, he said. It was only an iron bar and a ladder. You could have died on that roof, Clara. So could Jeremiah. I was not going to let him go alone. Samuel set his hat down on the table. He rubbed a hand across his bearded face. For one unguarded moment, she saw exhaustion and fear written there as clearly as if he had spoken them aloud. Thank you, he said. That was all. But he said it looking directly into her eyes, and she knew what it cost him to say, and she nodded once, and something between them, some invisible line that had stood there since November, moved quietly a small distance closer. Christmas Eve was the next great turning. They woke to fresh snow and a clear, bright sky. Caleb had come down from the high country 2 days before with an enormous elk, and Ida Pearson had been cooking for a full day already. The house smelled of roasting meat and cinnamon and pine. Clara May had, without telling anyone, sent for 3 small packages from Silver Creek. They had arrived with the mail sleigh the previous week. She had hidden them in her room. That afternoon, she dressed in her blue wool dress and came down to the parlor where the 3 brothers sat by the fire. She had placed the packages on the hearth. They looked at her in mild puzzlement. It is Christmas Eve, she said simply. My mother gave small gifts on Christmas Eve. I thought it should be done here too. Samuel started to speak. She could see him about to say something stiff about not needing gifts, about this not being necessary. Jeremiah caught his eye and gave the smallest shake of his head. Samuel stopped. He closed his mouth. Go on, Sam, Caleb said quietly. Open yours. Samuel's package was a small leather-bound edition of the sonnets of William Shakespeare. She had seen him once late at night take down a battered copy of the plays from the parlor shelf and read in it for 20 minutes before putting it back. She had written to an old schoolmate in Charleston and paid for the book out of her first month's household allowance. Samuel turned it in his hands. He did not look up for a long moment. Clara, he said finally, this is too fine. It is yours, she answered. Jeremiah's package was a small book of pressed wildflowers from the Carolina Low Country. She had pressed them herself as a girl and had carried them with her all this way in the bottom of her valise. She had thought he might like to see flowers that grew where no snow ever fell. He opened the book in silence. He turned one page, then another. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "These are kind, Mrs. Hollow," he said barely above a whisper. "These are very kind." Caleb's package was the smallest. Inside was a simple leather sheath she had bought in Silver Creek and had had engraved with three initials, CH. For a hunting knife she had noticed he wore loose at his belt without a proper sheath. He unwrapped it. He held it in his big hand. He looked up at her with that quick, crooked grin of his, but his eyes too were wet. "Mrs. Hollow," he said, "nobody has given me a gift in 7 years." "Well," she said, and she was suddenly crying too, though she did not understand why. "You have been given one now." That evening, for the first time since Lily had died, the Hollow brothers decorated a small pine tree in the parlor. Caleb had cut it that afternoon. Jeremiah strung popcorn. Samuel carried down from the attic an old wooden box with tin stars and glass ornaments, wrapped in faded cloth, his mother's ornaments, Miriam Hollow's. He handed them to Clara May one by one, and she hung them on the tree, and no one in the room spoke the whole while. They did not need to. The silence was full of its own meaning. When the tree was finished, Caleb lit the small candles on its branches. Jeremiah took up his harmonica. But tonight, for the first time Clara May had ever heard, he did not play one of the slow, mournful tunes. He played Silent Night. Samuel stood in front of the fire, his face turned away, his shoulders shaking very slightly. Clara May pretended not to see. And then somewhere near 10 o'clock in the evening, the wolves came. The first howl came long and close from the dark pines above the ranch. Rex the shepherd dog sprang to his feet in the kitchen and began to bark furiously. Samuel stiffened. He crossed in 3 strides to the rifle above the mantel. "The cattle," he said. "The barn." Caleb was already at the back door, pulling on his heavy coat. Jeremiah went for a second rifle. Clara May looked around wildly and then, without thinking, ran up the stairs to her room. She came down in half a minute with the small revolver Caleb had taught her to fire the previous week. She had practiced 3 afternoons in a row against tin cans behind the barn. On the last afternoon, she had hit the can from 20 paces, and Caleb had whistled and said, "Mrs. Hollow, remind me never to cross you." "Clara," Samuel said when he saw the gun, "would stay in the house." "I am coming," she answered. "I can shoot. Caleb taught me." He looked at her. For 1 second, she thought he would argue. Then he gave a single curt nod. "Stay behind me." They ran out into the moonlit yard. The snow was blue under the brilliant stars. The wolves came out of the trees a moment later, 9 of them at least, low gray shapes moving with terrible speed toward the cattle barn. The cows inside had begun to bellow. Samuel fired first. A wolf went down. Caleb fired. Another fell. Jeremiah moved to guard the barn door. 2 wolves tried to circle around the back of the barn, and Jeremiah fired at them through the open doors, wounding one and scattering the other. Clara May stood 10 paces behind her husband, with the revolver in both hands. A wolf broke away from the pack and made for the chicken coop off the side of the barn. Caleb spun to meet it. Another wolf, larger gray as iron in the moonlight, came out of the shadows on Caleb's blind side. Clara May saw it a full second before Caleb did. She raised the revolver. Her hands were shaking. She thought of the tin cans behind the barn. She heard Caleb's voice in her memory. "Steady your breath, Mrs. Hollow. Squeeze, do not pull. Squeeze." She squeezed the trigger. The revolver jumped in her hands. The big gray wolf dropped 3 feet from Caleb's back with a hole behind its ear. Caleb spun around. He saw the wolf. He saw Clara May with the smoking gun. His face went through 3 expressions she could not read in the space of a single heartbeat, and then he turned back to the barn and kept fighting. They killed 4 wolves. They wounded 2 more. The rest fled back into the pines. When it was over, Clara May was still standing where she had fired the revolver, hanging at her side, her breath coming in short white clouds in the moonlight. They had lost 1 cow and 1 horse. That was all. Later in the tack room of the barn, Clara May wound a clean white bandage around a long, deep scratch on Caleb's left forearm. He had caught it on something, a broken board or a wolf's claw, he could not remember which. The oil lamp burned low on the bench. Samuel and Jeremiah were still outside dragging the wolf carcasses away from the barn. She and Caleb were alone. She finished the bandage and tied it off. Her hands were still shaking. She could not quite make them stop. Caleb watched her face. "You saved my life tonight, Clara May," he said quietly. "I only did what you taught me." "No," he said. "You did more than that. That wolf was at my back and I did not see him. Another half second and he would have had me by the throat." He reached out with his uninjured hand and very gently, just for a moment, closed his fingers over hers to still them. "Thank you. I mean it." Their eyes met, and Clara May understood with a clarity that shocked her that something in the youngest Hollow brother looked at her now as he had not looked at her before. Not a brother's look, not a friend's, something else. Something warmer and more dangerous, and held down hard under his ribs where he would never let it out. She drew her hand back carefully. She did not speak. "You are my brother's wife," Caleb said almost to himself. It sounded like a thing he was reminding himself of, not a thing he was telling her. "You are my brother's wife, Mrs. Hollow, and he is a good man who has suffered enough for 3 lifetimes, and I would sooner cut my own hand off than ever do anything to hurt him." "I know you would," she answered very low, "and I would sooner die than let you have to." He nodded. That was all. Nothing more was ever said about that moment for as long as they both lived. But it had been said without words, and they both knew it. She finished bandaging his arm. She stood up. She carried the lamp out of the tack room and back to the house, and by the time she reached the kitchen, her hands had stopped shaking. January came. The days were bitterly cold and very short. Samuel began to come to her room more often. He still left before dawn, but he came. And once halfway through the month, he did not leave immediately afterward. He stayed and they lay in the dark together, and she found in herself the courage to speak first. "Samuel," she said quietly, "are you sorry you brought me here?" There was a long silence. She thought for a moment he had fallen asleep. Then he said, "Every day I thought I would be. Every day I have not been. I do not know what to do with that Clara. I do not know what to do with you." "You do not have to do anything with me," she said. "I am not something to be solved." "No," he agreed, "you are not. That is what frightens me." He left before dawn as always. But the conversation, too, was something that had been said and that could not be unsaid. A letter came in late January. It arrived with the mail sleigh from Silver Creek. The envelope bore a Denver return address. The handwriting on the outside was that of Obadiah Finch, the old lawyer who had handled Samuel's affairs 7 years before. Samuel took the letter to his office and closed the door. He did not come out for 3 hours. When he did come out, his face was gray. He did not speak to Clara May at supper. He did not come to the parlor afterward. Near midnight, she heard a hard sound from the library, a muffled thud, and then another. She rose from her bed. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders. She went down the dark hallway in her bare feet and opened the library door. Samuel was on the floor with his back against a bookcase. His right hand was bleeding. He had struck the heavy oak panel of the bookcase 3 or 4 times. The letter lay open on the rug beside him. Clara May knelt beside him without a word. She took his bleeding hand in both of hers. He did not resist. He did not look at her. He let her hold his hand in silence. After a long time, he said, "She is alive, Vivian. She is alive. And she is in Denver again, and Barnaby Ridgway is dead, and she knows we have money up here. Finch says she is asking questions. She is planning something. I do not know what, but she is planning something." "Then we will be ready," Clara May said. "You do not understand Clara." "I understand enough. I understand that she hurt your sister. I understand that she stole from you. I understand that she is the shadow behind every closed door in this house." She tightened her fingers around his. "But I am here now, and I am not afraid of her. Whatever she does, we will meet her together. You are not alone anymore, Samuel. You have three brothers in this house. You have me. You have a life that was not here a year ago. She cannot take that back." He closed his eyes. A single tear ran down his bearded cheek. He made no sound. He only let her hold his hand, and after a little while, he leaned his head very gently against her shoulder, and they sat together on the library floor for a long time in the dark. The next morning, Clara May went up to the small bathroom at the end of the hall, and when she came out again, and she was pale and her eyes were wide, and Ida Pearson, who was passing in the hall, took one look at her and smiled a slow, knowing smile and said, "Mrs. Hollow, I believe I know what you are going to tell me." "I am 6 weeks late," Clara May whispered. "Mrs. Pearson, I think I am." "Yes, dear," said the old housekeeper, laying one work-roughened hand against Clara May's cheek. "I thought so for some days now. You are carrying a hollow child. Praise God. Praise God for a hollow child in this house again." Clara May did not tell Samuel that day, or the next. She needed to hold the knowledge to herself for a little while. She needed to understand what it meant. An heir, a son or a daughter, a child who would grow up in this great silent house that had not heard a child's laughter in 7 years. She told him on the third night. He was reading by the parlor fire. Jeremiah and Caleb had gone to bed. The house was quiet. She came in and sat down across from him, and she said very simply, "Samuel, I am with child." He put the book down. For a long moment he did not speak. Then he came and knelt in front of her chair and laid both of his hands on her lap. Not on her belly, she noted later, but on her lap, as though he was not yet bold enough to touch the child, only the mother. He bowed his head. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you, oh God, Clara, thank you." She did not know she was crying until she felt the tears drop onto the backs of his hands. Outside, the February snow was falling thick and silent over the hollow pine ridge. The wolves were long gone. The cattle were safe in their barns. The three brothers slept under one roof, and beneath that roof, in a small, warm parlor by a burning fire, a woman who had come up this mountain 4 months before with nothing but a valise and a cameo at her throat sat with her husband's head against her lap and understood at last that she had found a home. She did not yet know that a woman named Vivian was already on a train from Denver. She did not yet know that a little girl named Addie, 7 years old, cold and frightened, was riding north to Hollow Pine Ridge with a secret that would split the family open. She only knew this. On this one quiet February night, the thaw had come at last. And whatever was coming after, she would face it not as Clara May Whitfield of Charleston alone in the world, but as Clara May Hollow of Hollow Pine Ridge. And she was no longer afraid. February became March, and March became April, and the snow on the high pastures began to rot and sink into the thawing ground. Clara May was 4 months with child. The small round curve of her belly was beginning to show beneath her dresses. She had taken to wearing her mother's wool shawl loose across her shoulders because the cameo at her throat felt heavier now, as though her mother were standing closer to her than she had stood in many years. The house had changed. Clara May could feel the change in her hands when she kneaded bread in the morning. She could feel it in the way Samuel now paused at the parlor door at the end of each day and looked for her before he went anywhere else. She could feel it in the way Caleb, who had always brought her a small wildflower or a smooth river stone, now brought instead small carved things, a wooden spoon, the handle shaped like a curled leaf, a little cradle mobile, 3 tiny wooden horses strung on a loop of leather. He did not say what the mobile was for. He only set it on the hall table one evening and walked away. And when Clara May picked it up, she had to sit down for a moment because her eyes had filled. Jeremiah had begun to play different tunes on his harmonica in the evenings. He still played the old sad ones sometimes, but now more often he played brighter melodies. Old Irish airs, a shepherd's jig his grandfather had taught him. Once on a March evening, he played a lullaby Clara May half recognized from her own childhood in Charleston, and she looked up sharply to find him watching her with his steady, quiet eyes. "My mother hummed this for me when I was small," she said. "My mother, too," Jeremiah answered. They smiled at each other across the parlor. That was all. but there are understandings that pass between two people without need of more words. The letter had not been spoken of in the house since the night Clara May had found Samuel on the library floor. But Clara May knew that Samuel had been writing. 3 times since January, a folded packet of correspondence had gone down the mountain with Caleb to the Silver Creek post office. Once a reply had come. Samuel had read it alone in his office and had said nothing at supper. Clara May had not pressed him. She knew what she needed to know. The name Vivian Ashmore was a shadow walking somewhere in the country beyond this house, and sooner or later the shadow would reach their door. It arrived on the afternoon of the 3rd of March. The day had begun fair. A thin blue sky, the pines along the ridge shaking off the weight of the last snow. Clara May was in the greenhouse with Ida Pearson pressing seed into warm black earth for the spring planting when Caleb came running in through the glass door without bothering to knock the snow from his boots. "A coach," he said, breathing hard. "A coach is coming up the road. A proper Denver coach. 2 horses a driver. There is a woman inside." Ida Pearson went very still. Her old hands for a moment forgot what they had been doing. She looked at Clara May. Clara May set down the small trowel she had been holding. She wiped her hands on her apron. She did not speak. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, and she could feel, for the first time in her pregnancy, the child shift inside her, as though the child too had heard something and had answered. "Where is Sam?" Caleb said. "In the far pasture with Jeremiah." "Ride for them," Clara May said quietly. "Now." Caleb turned and went. She heard his horse explode out of the yard a minute later. Clara May walked back to the house. She walked steadily. She did not hurry. She climbed the porch steps and she went inside and she took off her apron and she changed her dress for the good gray wool and she pinned her mother's cameo carefully at her throat. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the hall table. A young woman looked back at her, pale, calm, 4 months with child, a gold wedding band on her finger that had once belonged to a woman named Miriam Hollow, who had not lived to see any of this. "Mrs. Hollow," she said aloud to the woman in the mirror, "you will hold your ground." She went into the kitchen. She put a kettle on. She was pouring hot water over a china teapot when she heard the coach come into the yard. She did not go to the door. She let Ida Pearson go. She heard the front door open. She heard a woman's voice, clear and cultivated and too pleasant by half, saying, "Oh my, what a quaint little place. Is Mr. Samuel Hollow at home?" She heard Ida Pearson's slow, careful reply. "Mr. Hollow is out on the range. He has been sent for. May I ask who is calling and what your business is?" "Tell him Mrs. Ridgway is here, Mrs. Vivian Ridgway, and tell him I have his daughter with me." Clara May closed her eyes. The child inside her moved again. She set the teapot down on the kitchen table with hands that did not shake because she had told them not to. She smoothed the front of her gray dress. She walked out of the kitchen and into the front hall, and she saw standing just inside the door a woman in a black fur coat with a small girl pressed against her side. Vivian Ashmore, who had become Mrs. Ridgway, was perhaps 30 years old. She was tall and slim and elegantly made. Her hair was dark and carefully arranged beneath a fur-trimmed hat. Her eyes were the cold, pale green of river ice in November. She was, Clara May saw at once, very beautiful in the way that certain knives are beautiful. She carried herself like a woman who had been told she was beautiful too many times to ever doubt it. The child beside her was another matter altogether. She was small, 7 years old perhaps, dressed in a traveling coat that was too thin for the mountain, and a pair of boots that were visibly too small for her feet. Her hair was chestnut brown and badly combed. Her face was pinched with cold. Her eyes, when she looked up at Clara May, were enormous and frightened, and the color of whiskey held up to firelight. They were the eyes of every Hollow in this house. They were not, Clara May saw in a single clear instant, eyes Samuel had given her. No man who had not been in the room with this child's mother could have given her eyes like that, but also no woman could have chosen those eyes for a lie. Whatever Vivian meant to say, the child's face told a truth of its own, and the truth was only that she was a frightened little girl in a thin coat standing too close to a woman she was trying not to lean against. Vivian's eyes slid over Clara May with a quick professional appraisal, the way a buyer might look at livestock. "And you must be," Vivian said, smiling, "the help." "I am Clara May Hollow," Clara May said quietly. "I am Samuel's wife." For one small instant, Vivian's smile faltered. It was gone so quickly that anyone else might have missed it. Clara May did not miss it. "His wife," Vivian repeated. "How lovely. Samuel did not mention in any of his correspondence." "Samuel has not corresponded with you," Clara May said. "Won't you come inside, you and the little girl both? She is frozen through." "She is his, Vivian said, still smiling, not moving from the doorway. "Addie, Samuel's daughter, 7 years old this past November. Her father, her real father. Barnaby has been dead some weeks now in Denver. There is no one to take her but Samuel now. I hope you will be understanding." Clara May looked at the child looked back at her. Clara May did not look at Vivian at all. "Come here, sweetheart," she said gently, holding out her hand. Addie hesitated. She looked up at Vivian. "Go on, darling," Vivian murmured, giving her a small push at the small of the back. "Go and meet your father's kind wife." The little girl walked across the front hall and put her small, cold hand into Clara May's. "Mrs. Pearson," Clara May said, not taking her eyes from the child, "please draw a hot bath for this little one. And find her some of the old clothes in the cedar trunk upstairs, the ones that used to belong to Lily. Addie is going to have supper in the kitchen tonight, and then she is going to sleep in my old room. She is cold and she is tired, and she is a guest in this house. Mrs. Ridgway, you will speak with me in the parlor. My husband will be home in less than an hour." Vivian's smile had gone thin. "I do not believe we have been introduced, Mrs. Hollow." "We have been now," Clara May said. "Mrs. Pearson, please." Ida Pearson gathered up the little girl, as one gathers up a broken bird. She led Addie away toward the kitchen, murmuring gently, and the child looked back once over her shoulder at Clara May, with an expression Clara May would remember to the day she died. It was the look of a child who had not been spoken to kindly in a very long time, and who did not yet know whether to believe that anyone would speak to her kindly again. Clara May turned. "The parlor, Mrs. Ridgway, after you." Vivian followed her into the parlor with a rustle of black silk and the faint, expensive smell of some Eastern perfume. She did not sit. She moved instead to the fireplace, and she stood looking up at the silver-framed photograph of Miriam Hollow, as though she had every right in the world to stand there. "Miriam," she murmured, touching the edge of the frame with one gloved finger. "What a beautiful woman. Samuel never showed me her picture even when we were to be married." "Take your hand off that frame," Clara May said. Vivian looked at her in mild surprise. "I beg your pardon?" "You have no right to touch her picture," Clara May said quietly. "You have no right to use her name in your mouth. Sit down, Mrs. Ridgway. My husband will be here very soon, and we are going to settle this matter before he arrives, because I do not intend that he should have to speak with you at all if it can be avoided." Vivian lowered her hand. Something new came into her face. She was, for the first time since she had come through the front door, looking at Clara May as a person and not as a piece of household furniture. "You are a surprising young woman, Mrs. Hollow," she said, and sat down. "I am nothing of the kind. I am only a woman who has read your letter." "My letter?" "Your letter to Mr. Finch in Denver. Mr. Finch has been my husband's attorney for 11 years. He warned us in January that you were asking questions about this family. He warned us in February that you were planning to travel. He wrote us again in the first week of March, and his letter arrived here 4 days before yours did. We have known you were coming, Mrs. Ridgway. We have had time to prepare." Vivian went quite still. "Addie is Samuel's child," she said, but her voice had lost some of its polished ease. "Addie was born in November of 1880, Clara May said. "Samuel broke your engagement in July of 1880. He had not been near you in any intimate capacity for more than a year before that. Mr. Finch has the letters you yourself wrote to Samuel in the spring of '80, begging him to return to your bed. He has the physician's notes. He has a sworn statement from your own housekeeper in Denver A woman named Mrs. Partridge who is willing to testify that you had at least two other men in your house during the months in question. Barnaby Ridgway, and a third gentleman whose name I will not say aloud in this house because a child is upstairs. Addie is not Samuel's daughter. You know she is not. You came here because Barnaby is dead and his creditors are circling and you have no money and no husband and no one left to turn to. You came here to sell a little girl, Mrs. Ridgway. That is what you came here to do. The silence in the parlor was the silence of a knife being drawn. Vivian's mouth had gone white at the corners. You have no idea who you are speaking to, she said softly. I have every idea, Clara May said. You are the woman who took a 12-year-old girl to a house of the worst sort in Denver because you were jealous of her brother's love. You are the woman who let Lily Hollow see things that a child should never have to see. You are the woman who broke this family open so badly that 3 grown men lived alone on a mountain for 7 years, afraid to let anyone near them ever again. I know exactly who you are, Mrs. Ridgway, and I am telling you that you will not do it again. Not to Addie, not to me, not in this house. Vivian's hand had gone to her throat. I did not kill that girl. No, Clara May agreed. The river killed her. You only showed her the door. From outside, suddenly the sound of hooves, hard and fast. 3 horses coming up the yard at a full gallop. A shout, the back door of the house banging open. Clara May heard Samuel's voice in the kitchen saying one sharp, short thing to Ida Pearson. Then his boots in the hall. Then he was in the parlor door. He stopped on the threshold. He looked at Clara May first. Only at her. He looked at the round curve of her belly beneath the gray wool dress and at her calm face and at the way she was standing between Vivian and the door. And something in his shoulders that had been tight as a drawn bow all winter long, Clara May saw it loosen just a little because he could see that she was unhurt. Then he looked at Vivian. Clara May had wondered once or twice in the long nights of February whether Samuel still loved this woman in some hidden corner of his heart. Whether the first great love of a young man is the kind of love a man does not ever quite get over. She saw now that she had wondered about the wrong thing. There was no love in Samuel Hollow's face. There was not even hatred. There was only the flat, dead weariness of a man looking at a disease he had once survived. Vivian, he said, Samuel, you will leave my house. Samuel, our daughter. Your daughter, Addie is not mine, Samuel said. His voice was perfectly level. I have known she was not mine from the moment Finch's letter reached me in January. I know where she was conceived. I know when. I know by whom. I am sorry for the child. I am not sorry for you. Get out of my house, Vivian. Do not come back. Jeremiah had come in behind him. He stood in the doorway with a rifle broken open over his arm. He did not raise it. He only stood there. Vivian looked at him and at Samuel and at Clara May, and she understood in that moment that she had lost. I have no money, she said, and for the first time a real crack went through her voice. I have nothing. I have nowhere to go. If you turn me out tonight, I will freeze on the road. Clara May looked at her husband. Samuel looked back at Clara May. She saw the question in his eyes. She saw that he was willing to do whatever she asked him to do, that this was her house too now, and that the decision was as much hers as his. It was the first time she had ever felt all the way through her bones that she was truly the mistress of Hollow Pine Ridge. Samuel, she said quietly, give her $200, enough to get her to San Francisco, enough to begin somewhere new. In return, she will sign a paper renouncing all claim upon this family and upon the child Adeline forever before Reverend Barnes tomorrow morning. And she will never contact any of us again as long as she lives. Clara May, Samuel said softly, she does not deserve $200. No, Clara May agreed, she does not, but we can afford it, and I will not have it said of this house that we turned a woman out to die in the snow, even a woman such as this. We are better than that, Samuel. I need for us to be better than that. Samuel held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once and turned back to Vivian. You heard my wife, he said. $200. A signed and witnessed renunciation before the minister tomorrow. And you will never again, for as long as you breathe, write or speak or send a messenger to any soul that bears the name Hollow. Do you understand me, Vivian? Yes, Vivian whispered. You will sleep tonight in the bunkhouse with Mrs. Pearson sitting in the next room. You will eat at a tray in the bunkhouse. You will not come into this house again. You will not speak to Addie. At dawn, Caleb will drive you down to Silver Creek and put you on the southbound coach, and Reverend Barnes will witness your signature before you leave. Those are my terms. Do you accept them? Yes, Vivian whispered again. Then get up, Samuel said. Get out of my parlor and never, never let me see your face again. She went. Jeremiah walked her out. Clara May stood by the fireplace with one hand on the mantel to steady herself, because now that it was over, her legs had begun at last to shake. Samuel crossed the room in 3 long strides. He took her by the shoulders. He looked down into her face. Clara, he said, you should not have had to face her alone. I did not face her alone, Clara May said. I was never alone. I have not been alone since the day I came up this mountain, Samuel. I only did not know it. And then for the first time in his own house, and in the full broad light of day, and in front of the fireplace where his mother's photograph looked down on them, Samuel Hollow bent his head and kissed his wife, softly, once, like a man who had been walking through a desert for 7 years and had come at last to water. Addie ate supper that evening in the kitchen, wrapped in a blanket that had once belonged to Lily. She was given thick chicken soup and new bread and a mug of warm milk, and she ate all of it slowly with the wary concentration of a child who had not been sure when her next full meal would come. Ida Pearson did most of the talking. Clara May sat across the table and watched the child and answered a question or two when Addie dared to ask one. Her mother, she told Clara May in a very small voice, had said that there was a man in Montana who was going to be her new papa. And do you know what happens now? Clara May asked her quietly. Addie shook her head. Your mama has to go on a journey, Clara May said. A long one. She is not going to be able to take you with her. Addie nodded. She did not seem surprised. She did not seem sorry. That more than anything told Clara May everything she needed to know about the 7 years Addie had already lived through. Would you like to stay here, Clara May said, with us? Addie looked up. Her whiskey-colored eyes were very wide. In this house, she said, in this house, with Mr. Samuel and Mr. Jeremiah and Mr. Caleb, and with me, and with Mrs. Pearson, and with the new baby who will come in the summer. There is a baby. Yes, the baby will need a big sister. Addie stared at her, her small mouth worked a little. Her eyes filled. Could I call you Mama? She whispered. Only if you said yes. Only if it was allowed. Clara May felt the whole of her chest crack open like an eggshell. She reached across the kitchen table and she took both of Addie's small cold hands in hers and she said in a voice that would not stay quite steady, yes, my darling, you may, for as long as you want to. Always. Addie began to cry, very quietly, as though she had learned somewhere along the way that tears were things to be made small so that they would not attract attention. Clara May came around the table. She knelt on the kitchen floor in her good gray wool dress. She gathered the little girl into her arms, and she held her there, rocking gently, while the child writhed herself out against her shoulder. Over Addie's head, across the kitchen, Clara May met the eyes of Ida Pearson, who was standing at the stove with tears running openly down her weathered face. Behind her in the doorway to the hall, 3 tall men stood very still. Samuel Hollow, Jeremiah Hollow, Caleb Hollow. None of them spoke. None of them moved. They only watched the woman they had brought up this mountain 4 months earlier, holding the child that had come in the coach from Denver. And they understood, all 3 of them, at the same moment that their sister Lily, wherever her good, gentle soul had gone, had just in some quiet way been given a new little shadow to walk beside her through the spring. Samuel turned and left the kitchen first. He could not bear it. Clara May saw him go. She did not try to stop him. Some griefs have to be carried alone, at least for a little while. Caleb came forward instead. He crouched down beside Clara May and the little girl. He did not touch Addie. He only spoke in the quiet, gentle voice he had once used with the horses he broke to saddle. "Hello, Addie," he said. "I am your Uncle Caleb. I am going to make you a very small pair of snowshoes of your own this week. Would you like that?" Addie lifted her face from Clara May's shoulder. She looked at the man with the whiskey eyes who was her mother's color and her own. "Yes, please," she whispered. "Then it is done," said Caleb. And he stood up and he walked out of the kitchen too, but before he left the doorway, he turned back once and looked at Clara May and mouthed two silent words across the room to her. "Thank you." Vivian Ashmore Ridgway left Hollow Pine Ridge at dawn the next day. Caleb drove her down the mountain with Reverend Barnes beside him. At the base of the ridge, she signed in her cold, practiced hand the paper of renunciation. She put it in Reverend Barnes's hand. She boarded the southbound coach. She did not look back. Clara May was never to see her again in this life. March gave way to April. The last of the snow went out of the high pastures. Addie, whom everyone in the house had taken to calling Millie because the name Adeline had been used too often in her old life, and she wanted a new one, began to lose the pinched look around her eyes. She discovered the horses in the greenhouse. She discovered Caleb. She followed Caleb everywhere. He taught her to sit a small pony and to track deer in soft ground and to whistle through the gap in her front teeth. She was within 2 weeks of her arrival calling Jeremiah Uncle Jem and Caleb Uncle Cal and Samuel very shyly Papa. Samuel had not known what to do the first time she said it. He had looked at Clara May in something like panic. Then he had dropped to one knee in front of his new daughter and had said in a voice gone thick and strange, "That is right, Millie. That is who I am now." And Clara May, who was 6 months with child by then and learning every day how much larger a heart could grow than she had ever imagined, went out into the greenhouse one April morning, and for the first time in 7 years, somebody took down the third pair of gardening gloves from the wall. She put them on Millie. "These were your Aunt Lily's," she said. "She loved to plant things. She would have loved you very much, Millie. She would have wanted you to have these now." Millie looked up at her solemnly. She closed her small hands inside the old leather. "I will be careful with them, Mama," she said. "I know you will, my love." They planted sweet peas together along the south wall of the greenhouse. Outside, a thin spring wind was coming up the valley. Somewhere far down below in Silver Creek, 3 men who had ridden into town from Denver with hard faces and colder eyes were sitting in the back room of a saloon drinking whiskey and asking quiet questions of anyone who would listen about the little girl who had gone up into the mountains the month before and the sort of family that had taken her in. Reverend Elijah Barnes rode up to Hollow Pine Ridge on the afternoon of the 14th of April with a hard set to his mouth. He did not dismount at the porch. He only called for Samuel. Samuel came out. Clara May at the kitchen window saw them speak for perhaps 5 minutes. She saw the old minister hand Samuel a folded paper. She saw Samuel read it and refold it very carefully and tuck it inside his coat. She saw his face go to stone. Reverend Barnes rode away. Samuel came into the kitchen. He set the paper on the table between them. His hands, Clara May noticed, were perfectly steady. They were only steady like that when he was most afraid. "There are 3 men in Silver Creek," he said quietly. "They rode up from Denver 10 days ago. They have been asking about us, about Millie. They are debt collectors hired by the creditors of Barnaby Ridgway. Finch sent this last week with a rider. Reverend Barnes only reached it today. Their names are Jubal Creed, Silas Tanner, Wade Morrison. Morrison is the dangerous one. He has killed men before." Clara May sat down slowly at the table. Her hand went to her belly. The child, 5 months along, now turned inside her. "What do they want?" she said. "They want the girl," Samuel answered. "Barnaby owed $12,000 in Denver when he died. The creditors found out that Vivian had brought Millie north. They believe wrongly that Millie is Barnaby's legal heir. They mean to take her back to Denver and hold her against any money the Ridgway estate might still produce. They are not thinking. They are desperate. Desperate men do desperate things." "Samuel," Clara May said, "they mean to take her from this house." They mean to try. Jeremiah came in from the hall. He had been listening. Caleb came in behind him. Neither man spoke. They only stood and waited for Samuel to say what came next. Samuel laid the folded paper flat on the table with one hand. "We have perhaps 3 days," he said, "possibly 4. They will wait for a moment when they believe the house is weakest. They will watch us. They are watching us already. I know these men's kind. I have seen them before. Then we will not give them a weak moment," Clara May said. Samuel looked at her. She saw everything pass across his face in that single look: fear, pride, a thing that might almost have been love if he had let himself name it yet. "No," he said, "we will not." They made their plan that night in the parlor by the fire, with Millie already asleep upstairs and Ida Pearson listening from her chair beside the hearth. Caleb, who knew the mountain better than any of them, would ride out at first light to shadow the 3 men in Silver Creek. He would be gone 3 days. He would not come back to the house. He would follow the debt collectors until they moved, and then he would come in behind them like a wolf behind a wolf. Jeremiah would stay at the ranch. He would keep the barn and the stable locked. He would keep a rifle within arm's reach day and night. Samuel would not leave the house. He said it in those words. Not for any reason, not for any errand, not to fetch the mail or to check the far fence or to do anything at all. He would sit inside Hollow Pine Ridge with his wife and his daughter and his brother, and he would wait. That was the plan. It lasted 48 hours. On the evening of the 17th of April, a rider came up the mountain at full gallop. He was a boy from Silver Creek named Tobias Hume, 14 years old, the son of the postmaster. His horse was blown. He was white with fear. He had a folded note in his hand. It had been handed to him by the telegraph clerk in Silver Creek with instructions to ride to Hollow Pine Ridge and give it only to Samuel Hollow and no other soul. Samuel took the note. He read it. He read it again. "What is it?" Clara May said. Samuel looked up. His jaw was set. His eyes had gone flat. "Finch," he said, "from Denver. Finch says that the territorial court in Bozeman has issued a subpoena for me to appear tomorrow in the matter of the Ridgeway estate. He says the creditors have filed to compel my testimony because of my past connection to Vivian. He says the subpoena is real. He says if I do not appear, I will be held in contempt and a warrant issued." "Samuel," Jeremiah said quietly, "that is a lie. That is not how Finch writes." "No," Samuel agreed, "it is not. But you recognize the handwriting." "It is a forgery," Samuel said, "but a good one. Whoever wrote it has seen Finch's hand. Someone in Denver has been preparing this for weeks." "They are drawing you off the mountain," Jeremiah said. "Yes." Clara May stood up. She walked to the fireplace. She set her hand flat on the mantel. "Go," she said without turning around. "Clara." "Samuel, listen to me." She turned. Her face was very pale in the lamplight. "If that note is a forgery, then their plan depends on you believing it. If you do not leave the mountain tonight, they will know the forgery has been read through. They will come sooner and they will come harder, and we will not be ready for the countdown. If I leave this mountain tonight, Clara May, 3 men ride up it, and Caleb is already shadowing them, and Jeremiah is here, and I am here." She laid her hand flat on her rounded belly. "And this house is ours. Samuel, listen to me. Ride into Bozeman. Ride slowly. Sleep in Silver Creek tonight. Let them see you leave. Let them think their forgery worked. Tomorrow before noon, you ride back up this mountain at a gallop. You will find us still standing. I cannot leave you to face them. You are not leaving me. You are leaving a message for them in your empty saddle. You are telling them that the trap they set has sprung shut. And while they believe they have us, we are ready." She crossed the room. She took both of his rough hands in hers. "Samuel Hollow, I have been alone in the world before. I am not alone now. I have Jeremiah. I have Caleb. I have this house. If God wills it, in 12 hours, you will be back at this fireplace, and none of them will ever have laid a hand on our daughter. Go." He looked at her for a long moment, then at Jeremiah. Jeremiah nodded once. "She is right, Sam." Samuel closed his eyes. He bent his head. He pressed his forehead for one breath against Clara May's. If anything happens to her, he said, and he could not finish. Nothing is going to happen to her, Clara May said. Go. He went. He rode out of the yard an hour later with his saddlebags packed for a court appearance and his face arranged for any watcher who might be in the trees above the road. Caleb, a mile down the ridge and flat on his belly in a stand of young aspens, saw his brother pass and understood at once what was happening. He slid back through the pines and began to work his way down toward the three men's camp. The night came down clear and cold. A sickle moon stood above the eastern ridge. Clara May moved through the house and she checked every window and every door. She woke Millie, gently dressed her in warm clothes, and led her down to the root cellar beneath the kitchen. The root cellar had been dug deep into the hillside. It had a second concealed entrance through a hinged panel inside the greenhouse disguised as a shelf of seed jars. Samuel and Jeremiah had built it that way in the first year after they came up from Denver. They had never yet had cause to use it. Mama, Millie whispered, why are we going down here? Because some bad men may come tonight, my love, Clara May said. And I want you safe. You are going to stay down here with Mrs. Pearson. You are going to be very quiet. You are not going to come out no matter what you hear unless Mrs. Pearson tells you it is safe. Do you understand me, Millie? Millie looked up at her. Her whiskey-colored eyes were steady. Yes, Mama. Clara May kissed the top of her daughter's head. She settled Ida Pearson in beside her with two loaded shotguns, a lantern turned low, and a heavy iron bar across the inside of the cellar door. Then she climbed back up into the kitchen, and she closed the trap door behind her, and she laid the rag rug over it. She went to the hall. She took down the small revolver from the drawer of the hall table. She checked the cylinder. 6 rounds. She put 6 more rounds into her apron pocket. She walked into the parlor. Jeremiah was at the front window with his rifle across his knees. He looked at her. Clara May, he said, you should be in the cellar with Millie. No, she said, 2 guns at the door are better than 1. You are 5 months gone with a child, and I can still pull a trigger. Jeremiah, I am not arguing about this. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. The kitchen door, then, he said. You stand behind the kitchen door, and you hold it at your shoulder, and you do not fire unless a man comes through it. Do you understand me? I understand. If a man comes through it, you fire at his chest. You do not fire at his head. Chest is bigger. 2 shots. Then you run down the cellar stairs, and you drop the trap door, and Ida drops the bar, and nothing that walks on 2 legs gets down those steps. Do you understand me, Clara? I understand. He nodded. He turned back to the window. They waited. The moon moved across the sky. The house creaked. Far off, a single wolf howled once and was answered and fell silent. Clara May stood behind the kitchen door with a small revolver held in both hands at her shoulder the way Caleb had taught her, and she breathed slowly in and slowly out, and the child inside her rolled once and was still as though it too were listening. At a little past 2 in the morning, a board creaked on the back porch. Clara May heard it. She did not move. She did not breathe. She listened. A second creak, very soft. The sound of a man testing his weight on a step. Then quieter still, the sound of a knife blade working between the jamb and the latch of the kitchen door. She understood then. Jeremiah at the front of the house was the distraction. The 2 quieter men had come around the back in the dark. This was the break-in. She heard the latch give. She took a slow breath. She brought the revolver to her shoulder. She aimed at the level of a tall man's chest. The door opened. Wade Morrison came through it. He was a big man, black coat, black hat, a long pistol in his right hand. He was not looking for her. He was looking toward the hallway. He was looking for the stairs up to the 2nd floor where he believed the child would be sleeping. He took 1 step into the kitchen before he even registered that the door had opened silently under his hand instead of being forced. Clara May hollow fired twice. The first bullet took him in the chest, 2 inches left of center. The second took him in the shoulder as he was already falling. His pistol fired once as he went down a wild shot that tore a long splinter out of the kitchen ceiling. Then the kitchen was filled with gun smoke and the smell of burnt powder and the terrible silence that comes after a gun has emptied itself into a man. "Clara!" Jeremiah roared from the front of the house. "Kitchen!" she shouted back. "Down!" She did not stop to check the man on the floor. She ran for the cellar trap door. She flipped the rug aside. She lifted the trap. "Bar it, Ida," she called down. "Bar it now. I'm going to the hall." "Clara May, get down here. Jeremiah is alone up front." She dropped the trap behind her and she ran. The front of the house had erupted. Jubal Creed had kicked the front door off one hinge and come through it firing. Jeremiah had fired back from behind the parlor bookcase. Creed was down on one knee in the hall, bleeding from the thigh, but still firing. Behind him in the doorway stood Silas Tanner with a shotgun. Clara May stepped into the hall from the kitchen side with the revolver still in both hands. Tanner saw her. He swung the shotgun. Jeremiah saw Tanner swing the shotgun. Jeremiah did the only thing a brother can do. He stepped out from behind the bookcase. He put himself in the path of the shot. He fired his own rifle at Tanner one-handed as he did it. Tanner's shotgun went off. Jeremiah spun and went down. Tanner's rifle ball went into Jeremiah's shoulder, high out the back. Jubal Creed swung his pistol toward Clara May. From the broken front doorway behind Creed and Tanner, a third shadow came through. A very quiet man, slim and quick, with a long rifle that had no business being that steady in the dim lamplight. Caleb Hollow had tracked his men 2 miles through the pines and had come in behind them at the exact moment they had forgotten he existed. He shot Jubal Creed through the back of the neck. Creed fell forward. He shot Silas Tanner through the side as Tanner turned. Tanner fell sideways into the front door frame. Then the house was silent. For perhaps 3 seconds, Clara May could not hear anything at all. Her own heart was beating so loudly that it had deafened her. Then she heard Jeremiah's voice. "I am all right," he was saying from the floor by the parlor bookcase. "Clara, I'm all right. It went through. Clear. It went clear through. Clara, come here, check on Caleb." Caleb was already walking down the hallway. He had stopped to kick Tanner's shotgun out of his hand. He had stopped to kneel by Creed and make sure. He had not been hit at all. He came to Clara May where she stood trembling in the kitchen doorway with the still smoking revolver in her hand, and he took the gun out of her hand with infinite gentleness, and he put his arm around her shoulders and held her up because her legs would no longer hold her. "You did it, Clara May," he said over and over into her hair. "You did it. It is over. You did it." Samuel came up the mountain at dawn at a killing gallop. He had turned his horse before he had ever reached Silver Run. He had not been able to stay gone. He had ridden back through the dark. He came into the yard in the first thin gray of the morning, and he saw the front door of the house hanging off its hinge, and he thought in one terrible second that everything he loved was gone. Then he saw Clara May come out onto the porch in her white nightdress with Millie in her arms. Millie was wrapped in a quilt. Millie was weeping quietly against her mother's neck. Clara May's face was streaked with soot, and the shoulder of her nightdress was dark with another man's blood. She was whole. Samuel fell off his horse. He did not dismount. He fell off. He went across the yard on his knees, and he came up onto the porch on his knees, and he put his arms around his wife and his daughter, and he pressed his face into Clara May's hip, like a man who had been praying without knowing it for every minute of the last 6 hours. "I should not have gone," he said. "I should not have gone. I should not have gone." "Samuel," Clara May said. Her voice was still hoarse from the smoke. "Samuel, stand up. Look at me." He stood up. "You did go," she said, "and I am still here, and Millie is still here, and Jeremiah is hurt, but he is going to live. And Caleb came in through the back door like an angel of the Lord, and all 3 of those men are dead on my hall floor. And we are standing on this porch together alive in our own house. Do you hear me, Samuel Hollow? We held our ground." He looked at her. His beard was wet. He could not speak. "Come inside," Clara May said quietly. There is a great deal of blood to scrub off the floors, and a brother in bed with a bullet hole in him. And our daughter needs her breakfast, and Caleb needs a drink. And you, my husband, need to hold this child against your chest and understand that she is yours now. Not by blood, by choice. Come inside. He came inside. Caleb rode down to Silver Creek that same morning to fetch Deputy Wyatt Carson and the doctor. By nightfall, Dr. Ezra Crane had dug the rifle ball out of Jeremiah's shoulder and pronounced it a clean wound that would heal. Deputy Carson took written statements and did not ask a single question he did not need to ask. The bodies of Jubal Creed, Silas Tanner, and Wade Morrison were loaded into a wagon and taken down the mountain. A week later, a telegram came from Obadiah Finch in Denver. The creditors of Barnaby Ridgway had withdrawn all claims. There was no Ridgway estate to collect upon. Adeline Hollow, born Adeline Ridgway, was no concern of any court in Colorado. Millie was safe. The house was safe. The winter was truly over. They held the renewal of vows on the 12th of May, 1888. It was not a second wedding. The contract had been signed the previous November, and no court in the territory would have called it anything but binding. It was instead a thing Clara May and Samuel wanted to do for themselves and for the house and for the name they had both taken up. Reverend Barnes came up the mountain on a fine warm day with the dogwood in bloom in the lower pastures. The whole clearing smelled of new grass and pine. Clara May was 7 months with child by then. She walked down from the porch in a simple white muslin dress that Ida Pearson had sewed her with her mother's cameo at her throat, and Millie walking before her scattering handfuls of wild violets from a basket. Samuel stood under the old ponderosa pine at the edge of the yard with Jeremiah on his left and Caleb on his right. His arm was in no sling this time. Jeremiah's was still his shoulder, healing slowly. All three brothers wore clean white shirts and their father's dark coats. Reverend Barnes read the vows out of his old leather book. Samuel repeated them. Clara May repeated them. And then when the Reverend had said the last word and closed the book, Samuel did something he had not done at the first wedding. He took both of Clara May's hands in his, and he spoke to her aloud in front of God, and his brothers and his daughter, and Ida Pearson in the open Montana sky, and his voice shook only slightly. Clara May, he said, you came up this mountain 6 months ago with nothing in your hands but a valise and a cameo. You did not ask me for love. You did not promise me anything you could not give. You only gave me your word, and you kept it. And in keeping it, you built something in this house that I had stopped believing was possible. I did not know how to love you when you arrived. I am learning. I will be learning. I suspect every day I am given on this earth. But I know this. I would not trade the last 6 months for 20 years of the life I had before. You are my wife, not by contract, by choice. In front of these witnesses, I say it plainly. I love you, Clara May Hollow. I will love you all my days. Those words used to be engraved on my mother's ring. They are engraved on mine now. Clara May could not speak. She could only nod and hold his hands and let the tears run down her face without shame. Ida Pearson wept openly. Millie, who had gone quiet, tugged gently at Caleb's sleeve and asked in a whisper why everyone was crying. And Caleb crouched down and told her that sometimes grown people cried because they had been sad for too long and had only just now remembered how not to be. Millie thought about this for a moment, and then she nodded and she said, oh. And she took Caleb's hand and she walked back to the house with him beside her. Emmett Ezra Hollow was born on the 14th of August, 1888, in the small bedroom at the east end of the upstairs hall. Dr. Crane came up from Silver Creek. The labor was long and hard, but not dangerous. Ida Pearson was in the room through every hour of it. Samuel and Jeremiah paced downstairs. Caleb sat on the porch with Millie on his lap and told her stories about foxes and owls and a bear he had once seen standing up on its hind legs to pick huckleberries. At 7 minutes past 4 in the morning, the child's first cry came down through the boards of the upstairs floor. The three brothers stood up at the same moment. A boy, Ida Pearson called down from the top of the stairs some minutes later. A strong boy, the mother is well. Samuel come up, quietly now. He went up. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom. Clara May was propped against two pillows, pale and exhausted and smiling. The child was in her arms, wrapped in a piece of flannel, his small face red and furious with having been born. He had chestnut hair. He had his father's mouth. "Samuel," Clara May said softly, "come and meet your son." Samuel Hollow came forward very slowly like a man approaching a holy thing. He knelt beside the bed. He put out one enormous calloused hand and laid one finger very gently against the baby's tiny closed fist. The fist opened and closed again and closed around his finger and gripped. Samuel made a sound that was not quite a word. He bent his head. He pressed his mouth against his wife's hair. He stayed that way for a long time while his son held on to his finger and would not let go. Jeremiah came in next with Millie in his arms. Millie's eyes were enormous. "Is that my brother?" she whispered. "That is your brother, my love," Clara May said. "He is very red." "Babies often are at first. He will get less red." "Can I touch him?" "You can touch his foot, very gently." Millie reached out one small, solemn finger and touched the baby's foot where it stuck out of the flannel. The foot twitched. Millie gasped and then laughed and then said with great importance, "I am his big sister. I will take care of him." "Yes, my darling," Clara May said. "You will." Caleb came last. He did not say anything at all. He only looked at his nephew for a long time, and then he looked at Clara May, and he nodded once, and he turned away and went downstairs, and Samuel heard the back door open and close a minute later. Caleb had gone out to the yard to weep alone. That was his way. He had always wept alone. The years passed as all years pass on a working mountain ranch in weather and work, in the slow, small accretion of ordinary days. Miriam Lily Hollow was born in the spring of 1890. Thaddeus Ezekiel Hollow came in the summer of 1893. Winifred Jane Hollow was born in the autumn of 1895. And Abraham Lincoln Hollow, the last of Clara May's children, came into the world on a bright, cold morning in January of 1897. Millie grew up tall and quick-witted. She read every book in Jeremiah's library by the time she was 14. She rode like she had been born to a saddle. Clara May opened a small school at the base of the mountain in the summer of 1892, where she taught reading and arithmetic to the children of the miners and homesteaders in the valley. By the time Millie was 17, she was teaching alongside her mother. She married a young physician from Bozeman named Alistair Bennett in the spring of 1901 and went down the mountain to live in town, and gave Clara May her first grandchild 2 years later. Emmett grew up to look exactly like his father, sharper around the eyes than Samuel, but with the same slow, careful speech. He ran the ranch alongside his father from the time he was 20, and by the time he was 25, he was running most of it alone. He married a quiet, capable young woman named Lucinda Pryor in the autumn of 1910, and they built a second house on the north pasture, and they filled it with children of their own. Miriam Lily became a teacher like her mother. Thaddeus went east to study law at the University of Michigan and came home to practice in Denver. Winifred married a rancher in the Bitterroot Valley. Lincoln, the youngest, was 20 years old when the United States entered the Great War. He enlisted in the summer of 1917 against his mother's wishes and his father's silence. He came home from France in the late autumn of 1918 with a limp he would carry for the rest of his life and eyes that had seen things he would not speak of for the next 40 years. But he came home. Clara May never stopped thanking God for that. Jeremiah Hollow married in 1897 a soft-spoken school teacher named Beatrice Bellwether, whom Clara May had invited up from Charleston to assist with the growing Valley School. They had 3 children of their own. Beatrice died of pneumonia in 1929. Jeremiah, who had played his harmonica by the hollow fire every single evening of his adult life, played it for her through her last night. And when she had gone, he put the harmonica away in a drawer and did not take it out again for almost a year. Caleb Hollow never married. He never spoke of the reason. Clara May never asked. But more than once across the long years, she would come into the parlor late at night and find Caleb sitting alone by the fire with a cup of coffee gone cold beside him. And he would look up at her as she came in, and he would smile, and the smile would say the thing that had been said once many years before in the tack room of a barn full of lamplight and shaking hands, and never said again. They had given each other, both of them, the gift of a brother's honor kept. It had been enough for him. He said once, only once, to Millie when she was grown and had asked him why he had never taken a wife. He had said, "Well, your mother was all the woman I ever needed to love in this world, Millie. Not as a husband, as a brother. That was plenty for one lifetime." Thanksgiving of 1918, the great long table in the hollow dining room held 29 souls. Clara May had had this table extended year over year until it ran the full length of the room and 2 leaves more. Samuel sat at the head of it, 65 years old, his hair gone fully white, but his shoulders still straight. Jeremiah at his right hand, Caleb at his left, Clara May at the foot. In between them, their children and the husbands and wives of their children and the first of their grandchildren. Lincoln, home from France, 2 weeks, sat near his mother. Millie's oldest boy, 7 years old, insisted on sitting next to Uncle Caleb because Uncle Caleb always had a piece of sugar candy in his coat pocket. Before the meal, Clara May stood. She was 54 years old. Pondewarm. Her hair was silver at the temples. She still wore her mother's cameo at her throat. Samuel had given her a new gold ring for their 25th anniversary, but she had never taken off the first one. 31 years ago, she said, and the whole table went quiet. I stepped down from a stagecoach at the base of this mountain with a leather valise and a cameo, and not another earthly thing to my name. I did not know who the Hollow family was. I did not know what I was walking into. I thought I had nothing left to lose. I was wrong about that. I had everything still defined. She looked at Samuel. This man taught me that love can survive after it has been broken, that a heart that has been wounded is not a heart that has died, that the hardest men in the world, when the lamp is low, can be the most gentle of all. She looked at Jeremiah. This man taught me that silence is a language of its own, that there are things that do not need to be said aloud to be understood, that the quiet ones are very often the wisest. She looked at Caleb. And this man taught me that joy is a choice a person makes against the dark, that you can lose the most precious thing in the world and still find us courage to whistle on the way to the barn. That kindness given freely to a frightened stranger on her first night in a new house is a gift that is never forgotten and never repaid and never needs to be. She looked at her children and her children's children. And all of you, my darlings, have taught me a thing I did not expect to learn in this life. Family is not blood. Family is choice. Family is the people who sit at your table the year after year and who say yes when you ask them if they will stay. We are all of us the choice we have made to belong to one another. I am grateful every single day that I chose you and that you, against every probability of this world, chose me. She raised her glass. To this house, to the mountain that holds it, to the man who built it, and to every soul at this table, living and gone, who made it a home. The table rose. Glasses met. Samuel at the other end did not speak. He only looked at his wife across the length of the Thanksgiving table, and he raised his glass, and across 31 years, his whiskey-colored eyes said everything that had ever needed to be said between them. Samuel Hollow died in the winter of 1927. He was 74 years old. A lung fever took him slowly across the long, cold months of January and February. He lay in the bedroom where every one of his children had been born. Clara May sat with him every hour of every day. Emmett read the Psalms to him in the evenings. Jeremiah played the harmonica softly in the parlor below, so that the sound of it came up through the boards of the bedroom floor, the way it had for 40 years. Caleb sat in a chair by the foot of the bed and held his brother's foot under the blankets, like a man anchoring a boat. Samuel died a little after midnight on the 2nd of March. His last word was his wife's name. They buried him on the south slope under the great ponderosa pine, where he had stood to speak his vows on the 12th of May, 1888. Clara May did not cry at the graveside. She had cried enough, she said, across the 2 months of the illness. She had no tears left to give to a grave. She had saved her last dry eyes for the day it mattered most, so that she could stand steady for her children and her grandchildren at the moment they most needed to see her steady. She stood steady. She walked back to the house afterward with Jeremiah on one side and Caleb on the other. The three of them very old now, holding each other up. On a clear, bright morning in the autumn of 1930, Clara May Hollow sat on the front porch of the main house at Hollow Pine Ridge in a carved rocking chair Caleb had made for her on her 60th birthday. She was 66 years old. Her hair was fully white. Her hands were still strong. Her mother's cameo was still pinned at her throat. Jeremiah sat beside her, 75 years old now, his harmonica resting on his knee. Caleb was on her other side, 73, still lean, still quick, still with a crooked grin that had first made Clara May laugh in the yard in the snow of the second day she had ever been on this mountain. Out in the pasture below the porch, the children of Emmett and Lucinda were chasing each other through the last of the wildflowers. The smallest of them, a small, serious boy of 5 years old who had been named Samuel Ezra Hollow for the grandfather he had never known, had detached himself from his siblings and was climbing the porch steps with great determination toward his grandmother. He reached her chair. He leaned on her knee. "Grandmother," he said solemnly, "tell the story." "Which story, my love?" "The one about how you came here, first. The snow story with the valise." Clara May smiled. She looked out across the pasture, past the barn, down the long fall of the mountain towards Silver Creek, which she could not see from here, but which she could feel the way she could still feel the weight of her mother's cameo and the wear of a gold ring that had once belonged to a woman named Miriam. "Once upon a time," she said, and her voice was the voice of every storyteller who has ever sat a grandchild upon her knee. "There was a young woman from Charleston, South Carolina. She had lost her father and her mother and her brother, and she had no home left in the world. And one day on a rainy Tuesday, she read a small notice in a newspaper. And the notice said that there was a man in Montana who was looking for a wife. And the young woman wrote a letter, and the man wrote back. And so she got on a train, and then she got on another train, and then she got on a stagecoach. And the stagecoach took her to a place called Silver Creek. And at the bottom of a great mountain at dusk in the falling snow, three big bearded men came riding down through the pines on three tall horses to fetch her home." Samuel Ezra Hollow leaned closer. "And then what happened, grandmother?" Clara May looked at Jeremiah, still holding his silent harmonica. She looked at Caleb, still smiling his old crooked grin. She looked out across the pasture at the children of her children running through the asters and the dying sunflowers under the huge blue bowl of the Montana sky. She looked at the long shadow of the ponderosa pine on the south slope. "Then," she said softly, "she came home." The small boy considered this for a long moment. Then he nodded as though it was the only possible ending any story could have had. He climbed down off her knee. He ran off the porch to find his brothers and sisters. Somewhere across the pasture, his laughter rose and mingled with the laughter of all the others. On the porch, Jeremiah raised the harmonica to his lips at last. He played very softly the old tune he had played on his first Christmas Eve with Clara May in the house, the one he had played through all the winter since. Silent night. The notes drifted out over the mountain, and the wind took them, and the wind carried them down the long slope of the pines, and for one perfect, bright, quiet hour of the world, the woman who had stepped off a stagecoach in the snow with nothing but a valise and a cameo sat on the porch of the house she had built with three brothers over the course of 43 years, and she was at last exactly where she had always been meant to be. She was home.